So Nepal's spell with political instability continues, with KP Sharma Oli set to return for another term as Prime Minister of Nepal. Of course, a country that has a great deal of strategic significance for India, especially given its historic relationship with Nepal, as well as its strategic competition with China in South Asia. Joining us now to explain what's happening in Nepal, how exactly India should see the rise of this new government, is Ambassador Manjeev Puri, who, of course, has been our envoy in Nepal as well. Ambassador Puri, thank you so much for joining us. Could you begin by explaining to a general audience what this latest change in political fortunes in Nepal means, what Prime Minister Oli's return, KP Sharma Oli's return to the office of Prime Minister means for India?
Shashank, thank you very much. And let me at the outside thank you for your interest in Nepal. I will underline one thing right at the beginning. Nepal is our neighbor. It's a country which is not only in our region, but in an area in which we have very substantial and in fact the most extensive civilizational links. So do they have with us. There's also geography, strategic imperative, etc. And so therefore the issue of remaining engaged with Nepal must remain always uppermost as far as India is concerned. Nepal being a small country, sometimes politicians tend to play games, but that cannot be the case as far as we are concerned. I am very clear in my mind about that. It's a relationship, as you said, it's age-old, but it's about geography, it's about strategic relations, it's about civilization, and if I may finally say so, it's also about hegemony and so on. Now, let me turn to your question. Nepal has had constitutional democracy since the 1990s, but the monarchy was removed in 2008, and Nepal has a history of parliamentary, let me say, make and break. No party is ever able to obtain a clear majority, and so they cobble together coalitions which don't last because people have a fallout. Everyone wants to become prime minister. Now, very interestingly, in the past 10 years, 3 leaders in Nepal, Mr. KP Sharma Oli, who heads the Communist Party of Nepal, Mr. Sher Bahadur Dioba, who heads the Nepali Congress, and Mr. Prachanda, who heads the Maoist Center in Nepal. These 3 have been the leaders. They have exchanged positions as prime minister right throughout a 10-year period. And what has happened now is again exactly the same thing. Just to briefly tell your viewers, in 2022, and I'm not going before that, there were general elections in Nepal. These general elections threw up a house which was splintered. Out of 275 members, the Nepali Congress had about 88. The Nepali Communist Party had about 78. As you can see, none of them reached the halfway mark of about 135. Mr. Prachanda's party had 32, but along with a few other smaller parties who have about 15, 20 MPs, they cobbled together coalitions. In the first instance, Mr. Prachanda got himself elected Prime Minister after the 2022 election with the support of Mr. Sher Bahadur Dioba and the Nepali Congress. That coalition barely lasted a few months, and a change of heart. Mr. Dioba and the Nepali Congress were left out, and a new coalition was stitched with Mr. KP Sharma Oli of the Nepali Communist Party. Well, after about a year and a half, that too has gone. And now, a rarity in Nepal, the 2 big parties have come together in what we call the Grand Coalition. Between them, of course, they have the majority. And what they have done as part of a sort of deal between them is that Mr. KP Sharma Oli will be Prime Minister for the first year and a half, and then he will hand over power and Mr. Dioba will take over. Whether that happens, we don't know. But at this stage, Mr. Prachanda is no longer the Prime Minister. He lost a vote of confidence in the parliament, and Mr. KP Sharma Oli has been sworn in as the Prime Minister of Nepal. He's been Prime Minister many times over, so have the others, and it is a coalition between Mr. KP Sharma Oli's Nepali Communist Party and Mr. Sher Bahadur Dioba's Nepali Congress.
Understood, Ambassador. When a lot of conversation happens around KP Sharma Oli, the term pro-China is used a great deal. In the popular memory in India, his name is often affixed with the territorial tensions we had just a couple of years ago. He's, of course, seen as a face of nationalist diplomacy in Nepal and nationalist politics, which, of course, oftentimes manifests in saying things about India that are seen as objectionable by Indians. He's also seen as pro-China. That's, like I said, a label that's used for him. Can you help us understand KP Sharma Oli, his politics on India, his politics on China, and how his last term shaped up when it came to India?
Shashank, an absolutely important question. Now, Mr. KP Sharma Oli is a shrewd politician and typical of all politicians in Nepal, especially from the Pahadi community, the dominant community in Nepal. One of their fundamental traits is they play the India card. So anti-Indianism is a form of identity politics in Nepal. And when all is lost, you play this card, you try to, use nationalism as a peg to stay. Mr. Oli is no exception. He's done this in recent years. But, so have Mr. Sher Bahadur Deoba and Mr. Prachand. Whenever the need arises, Mr. Oli, leading a large party, has, displayed this many times in recent past. Now, both Mr. Oli and Mr. Prachand come from a left ideology. One is the Communist Party, the other fashions himself as the Maoist center. Although the Chinese, when they started calling themselves Maoists, said we had nothing to do with it. But, so be it. Left ideologies give them a veneer of being ideologically linked with the Chinese and the communists there. Although in reality, Nepalese communists are their own kind of communists. They go to the mandirs, they do everything else. They play the games in exactly the same way as everyone else does. But yes, they do have fundamentally a left of center philosophy. And so there is this kind of political, ideological proclivity in the direction of China. In any case, as far as they are concerned, it helps them play this particular card, this time saying very simply that, look, this is the nature of the politics that we pursue. So, Mr. KP Sharma Oli, when he became Prime Minister last time, which was in 2018, the beginning of 2018, he led a government in coalition with Mr. Prachand, and it was a government which had a near two-thirds majority in parliament. Now, in 2019, he welcomed President Xi Jinping in Kathmandu. President Xi came to Kathmandu after the famous summit with India in Mahabalipuram. He spent 2 days there. In 20 years, no president from China had visited Nepal. And he gave all sorts of signs that, they want to build relations with the Chinese. The Chinese, after all, are a dominant player in the sense that they're a huge economy. They have lots of money to spare, and they've been building infrastructure and so on. So the Nepalese try to play this game, and you can understand from their perspective, they think it's a very clever game that they are playing. Let me stop here and make one point. Mr. KP Sharma Oli was Prime Minister from 2018 to 2021. During that period, Prime Minister Modi visited Nepal twice. There was a massive bilateral visit in 2018 in which he addressed a gathering of more than 200,000 people in Janakpur, something which hadn't happened in 2014. We also inaugurated some of the most important bilateral projects. The Arun 3 hydroelectric project, which will in the end produce nearly 1,500, 1,600 megawatts. Hydropower has been talked about for 20 years, but nothing had happened till Arun 3, which is now about 50% complete. And it happened when KP Sharma Oli was the Prime Minister. We inaugurated a pipeline which links India and Nepal, and now oil supplies to Nepal all take place through this pipeline. So in some senses, that critical bone of contention, you've stopped the supplies, that just is not possible anymore. We've opened these integrated checkposts to facilitate trade with Nepal. Some of the biggest things happened at that time. But you're right. As things in Nepal towards the end of 2020, after the COVID times and so on, they became a little tense because Prachand was on his beck and call saying that, come on, it's time for you to hand over and me become the Prime Minister. Those were the deal. But in Nepal, they sign deals and then people say, thank you very much. and deals are not really supposed to be honored. Everyone knows it, yet they entered deals because it's politically expedient at that time. But Mr. Oli went to an extent at that time to, save his own gaddi, as they say, by reaching out to the anti-India sentiment in an extreme manner. Nepal has had all kinds of, there are small claims. 98% of Indo-Nepalese border is demarcated. There are two small outstanding claims. And there is this third issue of the lands to the east of what is called the Mahakali River and in Nepal and Sharda in India, which were never demarcated, but the whole world for more than 100 years has accepted those lands. Are Indians, our people live there, our forces are present there, everything. But, it was perhaps an egregious one, but the one that brought about nationalism, and he needed to save his skin because Prachand was breathing down his neck. And he played this card. What he did with it was not just make a territorial claim. These things happen between contiguous countries. But he amended the constitution of Nepal, where there is a little clause about the national symbol of Nepal.
Right.
And that national symbol has the map of Nepal. He had it amended in such a way that this little protrusion, which they lay claim to, has become so preeminent and stands highlighted. Naturally, it was an extremely egregious act which was done. But, mind you, everybody in the Nepali parliament, including the Nepalese Congress and Prachand's party, everyone had to go along because it had raised nationalist stakes to such orders. However, when Mr. Prachand pulled the plug from Mr. Oli's party, Mr. Oli tried to dissolve parliament, and he tried to do it on two occasions. But the Nepalese Supreme Court ruled against him in both times because the Nepal constitution, unlike the British system, does not give the Prime Minister the sole prerogative to be dissolving parliament when he or she wishes. It demands that all efforts be made to keep parliament through its entire life of 5 years. And Mr. K.P. Sharma Oli was dismissed by the Supreme Court, which then said Mr. Sher Bahadur Dioba, who had the support of Prachand and therefore crossed the halfway mark, and he was allowed to become Prime Minister of Nepal. So it's interesting. This is a mixed bag. Mr. Oli plays the cards and is willing to play them at the extreme. But in the past, we've dealt with him, and we've dealt with him for huge and massive things which have been sort of positive and have long-term positive implications. But you're absolutely right. The proclivity is to play India by giving China a longer and greater reach into Nepal. The issue is the Chinese have growing abilities, their economic clout is growing, and their hegemonistic ambitions are growing. So while the Nepalese may think that they are simply playing a kind of diplomatic game, the other side is a serious major player, and we need to react because we recognize that this is not just a game. There is something very serious happening, which has national security implications as far as we are concerned.
Understood. Could I ask you, Ambassador, about that equation about India and China? There is this conversation about a BRI implementation agreement that has been in the works for a while. Of course, Prachanda's government did not push it through. There are conversations about whether the new government may be so inclined to do this. And of course, India has had its concerns with the BRI in the past and about Chinese investments. China has had concerns about American and Indian investment in Nepal. Could I ask you to lay out for our viewers just this sense of what's going on, this great game in Nepal between ourselves and the Chinese and other foreign players?
So, Shashank, first, let's be very clear. India has 1,500 kilometers of a land border with Nepal, which is an open border. People can cross over on either side. No passports are required. But the Nepalese also have a 1,400-kilometer land border on the other side with Tibet/China. This is something that we all tend to forget. But this is a fact. And historically, the Nepalese have had contacts on the other side with the Tibetans. In the days of yore, there were several battles. At some time, the Nepalese were even paying a kind of, let me say, this sovereign tribute to the Chinese. At some time, the Tibetans were paying it to the Nepalese. So there's an old history to all of this. But let's leave all of that aside and let's focus on the situation as exists today. Look, India is by far Nepal's largest trading partner. More than 2/3 of Nepal's trade happens with India. More than 75% of Nepalese exports come to India. And I can tell you, if we include the informal trade which takes place because it's an open border, even for India, Nepal is one of our larger trade destinations, our larger export destination. Cumulatively, over time, we are by far the largest investors in Nepal. But of recent times, there are all kinds of things which happen in summits which take place where the Chinese announce we are going to do this project and that. As of now, their presence is visible and can be seen in Nepal, but it has been the case for 50, 60, 70 years in kind of competition which was possible at that stage, with the Chinese economy being what it was then versus now. You see buildings made by the Chinese, you see them bidding for road projects, you see them wanting to take students. The same thing that we are doing. Their abilities and scales are more, but it doesn't mean that the lean in the direction of Nepal in terms of the people, in terms of China, in terms of the people of Nepal is in any case, in any way comparable to what is happening as far as India is concerned. Politically, however, it remains matters of concern because the Chinese are also making some kind of inroads with the Nepalese army and people like that in the defense sector. So it is a matter of concern for us, and we need to be extremely mindful and watchful on that. So when the Nepalese, in what they may think that they are playing political games, when they give them opportunities, for example, this territorial plug, this territory is not anywhere else. This territory is right at the tri-junction where the Nepalese, Indian and Chinese border. It's a huge strategic implication for both the Chinese and the Indians. I'm not saying for Nepal because it's a small country at the end of the day in this game. So the Nepalese tend to play this, and therefore we have to be very concerned. We also have to be extremely hawk-eyed and look at each of these things because all of them do have national security implications, but also along with that, it is very important to maintain this civilizational link because that's really what binds our two countries together and people together. And I have nothing much to say except the way I look at it is, it's in the end in the interest of the Nepalese who know India well, that they should be perhaps best positioned to leverage the growth and opportunities in India and take advantage of them for their own country. This is a fact. We can keep talking about China, but the cost of bringing things, no matter technological evolutions, etc., are such that without doubt, geography favors India. And this is Nepal's advantage as far as India is concerned. Games have their own place in diplomacy, in the way identity politics is played, but frankly, you need to be more mindful of what is in your interest. And I believe India, without any doubt, and the Nepalese do know it, but they can't, sort of contain themselves from playing the games which they've played for generations.
Understood, sir. So if I can ask you one final question, then I think what will be at the top of minds of most people is there's a sense that, okay, we know that the government in Nepal will play its games between India and China. We know that exploiting anti-Indian sentiment will be a political card to play. Do you see things like the territorial dispute between India and Nepal coming back into the fore over the next couple of years as the government comes in? There's also this theory being advanced, really, that actually because the Nepali Congress is also in that coalition, you won't really see this anti-India card being used that much. So will we see more tension or will we see moderation in terms of KP Sharma Oli's rhetoric on India?
Shashank, first, I didn't answer the question on BRI. The Nepalese, despite all their leans towards China, have been quite clever in staying out of the Chinese debt trap creation, something that happened in Sri Lanka. On the BRI, they've kept making all the noises, but really not signed on. In fact, the government which has just fallen, the government which had Prachanda as Prime Minister and Mr. Oli as his principal backer, the foreign minister of Mr. Prachand, Narayan Kazi Shrestha, made a lot of noises, and many people said the signing of the BRI implementation agreement is imminent, but it didn't happen. Now, this is a government in which Mr. Oli is there along with Mr. Dioba. Now, I don't want to overstretch the fact that the Nepali Congress will do exactly India's bidding. No, they will also do the same rent seeking, which is very common to all Nepalese politicians. They'll play all the usual cards which Nepali politicians have played. But they, because of their old linkages with India, they're much more mindful of Indian interests. Mm-hmm. And so I would imagine that in this grand coalition, Mr. Oli will certainly not want to give up on his China thing, but it will not be in the prominent manner. Let me make a simple point to you. The current foreign minister is Arzu Dioba Rana, the wife of Mr. Sher Bahadur Dioba. She schooled in St. Bede's College, Shimla, and in Punjab University. So, there are links, there are things of the heart and so on, which are important. And we should be mindful of this. Secondly, let's also remember this. Mr. Oli put out a statement through one of his closest confidants that his will be a neutral government, and he will see that the territory of Nepal is not used by anybody for the detriment of the third country. This is a signal that, look, whatever has happened, we will try to maintain a relationship. It doesn't mean that they will be sort of simply turning their backs toward the China. No, that won't happen. But on the other hand, will it be an open segue? The answer is no. Will it be an open segue for us? No. But we need to engage ourselves with the Nepalese, remain strongly engaged. Shashank, I may just make a simple point to you. The Nepalese tire us. The Nepalese challenge us tremendously. And when I say the Nepalese, I mean the Nepali politicians. Mm-hmm. Many a time, as India is pursuing its own growth across the world, reaching a point of a major place on the global high table, people tend to take the view, come on, they get annoyed with them. There's a degree of frustration with them. There's a degree of lack of understanding. And then the best case scenario is ignore them. No, you shouldn't do that, because that would be at your peril. Civilizationally, in terms of strategic value, despite all what they do, let me say the headaches that get created, just be engaged with them, because they are important, of course, without any doubt, within the limits of diplomacy and the diplomatic game. At the end of the day, it needs to be very clear. Both India and China are countries which are there for now and forever. And whatever happens between them will happen. Nepal, as a small country, needs to understand that the limits of the game should be very clearly understood by them and their leaders. So, geography, I might say, is something which they believe places them at an advantage. I'm happy that they look at it like that, but it's one in which they need to be extremely mindful of what is happening, especially as both India and China are becoming major players, not just regionally, but becoming players globally and internationally, and countries of great importance. Now, we've left out the West. In the last 20 years, the West has built a great deal of equities in Nepal. The entire ideas of their population being empowered flowed from the Maoist insurgency, which got global NGOs, etc., to come. Once upon a time, and I'm sure that's perhaps still the case, people used to say that after Afghanistan, and I'm talking about pre-Taliban Afghanistan, after Afghanistan, the largest number of Western NGOs in Asia were operating in Nepal. And you see that there's been a rise of Christianity, you see their influences happening. And then what do you see? Today, about 25% of Nepalese population is overseas. They are there in India, but that's not the only place where they are there. They are there in the Gulf, where they do the same kind of work as people from India. They're there in Southeast Asia. They're in Australia. They're in the United States. They're in Europe. They're in the United States of America. They're all over the place. Nepal is among the 6th or 7th largest countries in terms of receiving remittances, in terms of their GDP. So it's a huge change that's happened. The exposure to globalization is tremendous. And so, therefore, this Western influence is not something that we should underestimate. In fact, in Mr. Prachand's last coalition was a small young party called Rashtriya Swatantra Party, which got 20 votes, 20 seats in a parliament of 275, having contested in just 2 or 3 provinces out of 7 provinces in Nepal, led by a young anchor who had even held American citizenship till some time back. So among the young, there is this disillusionment. Globalization is having an impact. And we need to be mindful of all these changes in terms of Nepalese society. But geography, history, civilizational links are all with us. We need to remain engaged as we progress our abilities to do things. And at the end of the day, everybody wants things done for you or places where you can get some advantage. Our abilities will be much larger. And I hope the Nepalese look at it, that they have an inherent advantage, an advantage plus, I should say, with India. And they too look at it in the same way. Engage strongly, my advice, my request to them, and my advice to my fellow colleagues in India.
Understood. Ambassador, thank you so much for sitting down with us, explaining the relationship between India and Nepal and the election result. Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri.
Thanks, Shashank. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.